Oh. Bethesda has finally dropped the NDA for the Quake Champions beta, and everyone wants to know, is it more like Quake Live or Quake 3 Arena? The answer is mostly the latter, with the weapon balance feeling kinda like the former, but before I dive any deeper, just as a PSA, if you didn't get invited to the Quake Champions closed beta for PC, stop right now. Click on the link in the description to sign up, and you'll get emailed the code immediately so that you could start playing. Like every other shooter game coming out nowadays, trying to capitalize on the latest fad, Quake Champions is a hero-based arena FPS game, and a huge improvement on Doom's fun but mostly bland multiplayer experience. It also takes the other latest bad fad in first-person shooter games, loot boxes, which I'll talk about later. The gameplay feels like the Quake back when kills were called frags, fast-paced bunny hopping and zipping around the map in the always hold W type of fashion. There it is, put that shit on the grill. Ooh! It may feel like Quake Live when you're tasked with picking your starting weapon in a loadout. However, these weapons are inferior versions of the ones you could pick up on the map, much like in the Quake days of yore. Even though I can pick between nail gun, shotgun, and machine gun, there's a super nail gun, super shotgun, and heavy machine gun laying around on the map that do more damage and have other benefits over the starting weapons. Of course, the holy trinity of railgun, rocket launcher, and lightning gun haven't been messed with, as they're still the strongest weapons in the game, and there's no limit to the number of weapons you can grab like a normal arena shooter. Of course, there's also health and armor pickups on the ground, as well as introducing hourglasses to slow your ability cooldowns and the infamous quad damage. But the issue I have with it is that the game announces that it's going to be available within 15 seconds, which is akin to someone ringing a dinner bell and all of the players rushing towards where it spawns. The big difference between Quake Champions and Quake 3 Arena comes with the champions, duh.
And I think tomorrow's going to be the worst.
Woo! Suck my dick! Whereas in other arena shooters, all players are on the exact same footing, different champions have different health, armor, and speed, along with different active and passive abilities, which throws a giant fucking monkey wrench into trying to balance all this shit out. However, it is important to note that aim and movement skills are still king, even with all the extra beepity bops and character differences. Some of the active abilities are more useful than others, but most don't really have a great impact on how the gameplay works. The passive abilities also add additional depth with things like wall running and jumping, increased movement speed after strafe jumping, and damage reduction from self-explosions. The difference in speed really isn't all that great, so health and armor become much more important, especially since armor does a 2/3 reduction to damage. This means that characters with more health and armor are better than those squishier characters that can move just a little bit faster, because the hitboxes are very similar for almost all of the characters, and so is the speed. Sorlag, Visor, and Scalebearer are easily the best characters, while Slash, Nyx, and Galena are the worst, and it's easy to see a pattern there in terms of health and armor. The reason why Anarchy isn't in that bad list is because his passive movement abilities are so good, along with the health injection to keep powering him up as the match goes along. Meanwhile, Clutch is terribad despite having big health due to a massive hitbox, and his speed is so much slower without the Sorlax Bunny Hop passive ability. His passive ability actually requires walking or standing still, which is blasphemy in an arena shooter. Most of the time, however, those character abilities don't move the needle one way or the other. The ability balance is more easily achieved than one might think, because the active abilities are on a timer cooldown, which isn't the same for all of the champions. The default champion Ranger has a teleport-like ability, which is a 20-second cooldown, versus Visor, who has a wall hack-like ability, which is obviously more powerful. It has a 45-second cooldown. This champion aspect also has ramifications with the damage of the weapon pickups, which gets into the Quake Live territory of types of weapon balancing, because for some characters with low health but increased mobility, a railgun will one-hit them, but for characters with higher health and bigger armor and less mobility, it isn't a one-shot kill, which means you'll have to constantly be swapping weapons to figure out which is the best to use on certain characters. That was sick. This also means that picking up a railgun or rocket launcher is much less impactful in this game than older Quake games because of the discrepancies between armor and health. I think that the idea of champions will lead to greater replayability and even further depth of the meta between all of the different variables in play. However, this balance of champions is going to be an issue and one of the biggest challenges for id Software, because it literally impacts the meta of everything within the game. There's going to be 12 champions on launch, and thus far in the demo, only 9 have been available, so some haven't even gotten the airtime for tweaking during this beta, so you know on launch that there's gonna be a problem with balance. As far as pricing goes, Quake Champions is going to be both a free-to-play game and a paid title. How is that possible, you may ask? Well, if you pay for the Champions Pack, which they haven't disclosed what the price is, you get instant access to all of the champions forever. If you choose not to go this route, there is an in-game currency which you get via playing and completing challenges. You could use this type of currency called favor to rent champions, although game director Tim Willits said, quote, "I don't want to use the word rent. You do spend favor to have access to them for a limited amount of time, yes, but you don't spend any real money on it." When I look up the definition of rent in the dictionary, it is access for a limited amount of time, you twat waffle. However, you could spend real Skrilla on different types of in-game currency which is not earnable to unlock champions permanently instead of renting them for a limited time. As far as I can tell, you cannot unlock champions permanently via completing challenges or getting lucky in loot boxes, which only contain cosmetic items for all of the different champions. You will need to buy them with actual cash money. I know that this game is free to play, but having champions hidden behind paywalls, who by the way aren't supposed to be better than Default Ranger, but I've already described how difficult balance is going to be between the champions, is a huge red flag for me. There are already loot boxes in the game which contain cosmetic items like skins for champions and even throwback models for weapons which can be bought, so why do we need a pay-to-win-esque model with the champions as well? It's important to note that during the closed beta, which the NDA was lifted, I have access to all of the champions, but this is not how the game is going to be if you do not purchase the champion pack. You only have access to Ranger, which is what people got that did not play under the NDA experience. In all, gameplay feels crisp and fast-paced like it's 1999 all over again in terms of an arena shooter, picking up weapons and fragging enemies. But the inclusion of champions with different abilities has a huge amount of depth and meta to bring Quake into the present day. I'd rather have the champions not have different attributes like speed and health in order to make the guns feel more impactful at times, but again, this adds the challenge of being able to do well with multiple types of weaponry. The free-to-play, unless you want to buy it, aspect of the pricing model has me worried about pay-to-win, but if I do get this game, and so far it's looking like it, I'm going to buy the Champions pack so I could use any character without restrictions. The Champions do add in some variety, but the differences don't impact the gameplay too much, which begs the question, do they even need to be there? For the sake of depth and certainly microtransaction opportunities, the answer is yes, they are a positive aspect of the game. Originally, in my Lawbreakers review, I was worried about that game being sunk by Quake Champions, but this payment model actually helps Lawbreakers, as in that game, there's nothing being locked behind a paywall. But Quake Champions is much more like an arena shooter than any of the hero-type shooters we've seen before, including Lawbreakers. It's what Doom's multiplayer should have been. I've been the Schwans27, out like the Capitals. Until next time. Oh!